You're listening to the Energy is Love podcast.
I'm so scared.
We're nervous to start talking about what this episode is about because it involves sex. And we're trying to be like mature adults. And right off the bat, I just like nailed it, right?
Right.
We're talking about sex.
I almost started singing again.
Right.
Like you can say that. You have to like do the salt and pepper song.
It's such an uncomfortable topic.
It is.
Even like, so like right now.
But it's not.
It's really not. It's so funny.
It's like the most natural thing in the world, but we're like.
It's integral.
Right? It's
right?
how you are here.
Right. And like I have two perspectives in my mind, either being like a silly goose and talking about sex in a super immature, childish way and making jokes and puns and like throwing out all the that's what she said throughout this entire episode.
Or
like I need to borrow your glasses and I'm going to fix my hair and put my hair up. And then we're just going to become very professional as we discuss sexual intercourse with penises and vaginas and vulvas and clitorises. And
how many people are like driving right now with their kids and just like fumbled through the radio and like drove over a curve?
Yes.
Like hopefully that's not the case.
Okay.
Hopefully if you've listened to this before, you know that we are not. You don't
should
listen
have done
to
a
it
trigger
when you're with your kids.
We should have done a trigger warning.
mean,
well, now you've been warned.
right? Why did he say penis? So we're gonna talk about sex.
But we're going to talk about an aspect of it that may not necessarily be on your radar, or it's probably on your radar. You just don't even realize it.
Yeah,
it's kind of the subconscious parts of relationships that we're going to get into a little bit.
Emotional aspects, not the technical aspects.
Yeah, we all know how things work.
Yeah, this is not a how-to podcast.
And we're not going to discuss like this isn't
at least this episode.
This isn't about how to like spice up your sex life or
at least this episode.
All the different. Yeah, this is not what that's about.
Yeah, it's not that at all.
What this is about is discussing first and foremost this broader topic that kind of is going to frame this conversation and frame this episode. And the idea is that you and I both have this experience in our relationship, which is kind of what this stems from.
Yeah.
Is I need.
Sorry.
You're okay. It's not to say I need, but over the course of our relationship, and especially over the course of my life, I've recognized that like emotional connection is really difficult for me.
Yeah.
Like real, honest, emotional, vulnerable connection is really hard for me. And oftentimes I will, and I still do this sometimes, even though it's like way better and it's way different now in our relationship, but I will try to find that emotional connection through sex. So you and I will have sexual intercourse, and then I had to be childish about it.
You can say it.
Okay.
When we have sex, when sex happens.
In the past, that's how I would quote unquote like I would need sex or use sex in a way that would then stimulate that emotional connection and that vulnerable connection with you. And then do you want to articulate the side of the spectrum that you fall on?
Yes, I do actually. I don't know. I guess we're just going to go deep right away. That's not a pun. I heard it. I feel dumb feet heard it. It is not a pun. Jesus, now I squirreled myself.
That's also not a pun.
Okay.
That's not the new sex term that we're going to be talking about.
We are not doing like...
Baby, did you get done squirreling yourself?
Oh, Jesus. So here we go. Yeah,
we're going to have a balance of professionalism.
So if you have a hard time talking about it, you can like give yourself some grace, because clearly when you sit down to have a serious conversation about sex, sometimes it can be difficult. And you and I are really good at like allowing sex to be fun and funny.
Yeah.
So it's natural for us to be silly with it, because we don't, sex isn't like, it is serious and it does have all these like connection. And there's times it's really like intimate and this whole sacredness that is just incredibly profound and beautiful. And we are so lucky to experience that. And other times we're giggling and like having fun and finding out that like, oh, our bodies don't do that anymore. Or look what I can do. It's just like, it's all the dynamics. So just come laugh along with us and be serious with us. And you're here for the ride. It's a ride. We're a riot ride. No, we're not. Damn it. I did it again. Fuck. Okay. Just move on. I didn't even hear it until your eyes. Like I would have just
The
kept
last 15
talking
things
and
you
never
said.
caught it.
Come along, folks. We're a ride.
Okay. So I can answer this question
yes,
that I've
your
tried to
side
avoid.
of the spectrum, the framework for this conversation.
I used to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
I used to very much like sex was for connection, and like even like the non-connection, just like the completely disconnected sex in past lives or past relationships, we'll say, was service, like something that was expected of me, like my responsibility to like all of the like unhealthy dynamics that you can put. That's what my sexual relationship was from. That's what I knew it to be.
Your role when it came to
my
sex.
role. And, you know, anyways, so a whole other level deep there that we could go. And then us, like that shifted. It wasn't my role, but it was still my role, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I wanted like that connection, and sex equaled connection. And because sex for you would stimulate that connection, I also associated, when I do this, I get this.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, which is kind of an unhealthy, not kind of, it's like, that's not a healthy way to go about it. But sex meant that I got your love. So of course I was providing that. And like, then I was enjoying myself too, but like it had like a cause and effect very much.
I just want to like articulate sex equaled I got love. Like love would, like we could replace, and love is fine, I guess, for the context of this conversation, but like that's how you would get connection. So like you wanted
that
intimacy,
was my interpretation.
You wanted connection with me. You wanted to feel that close bond between the two of us, right? Which is basically what we're talking about here.
Which I got during sex, right?
But then also it was like the act of sex was the only way that you could get that. And for me, it was difficult for me to show up in that intimate way of that bond and that connection outside of sex.
Yes.
Because I was programmed that like show up vulnerably and show your emotions and connect is a sign of weakness and all sorts of different things. So this is what we're going to get into.
Yeah.
Is we're going to talk about how this dynamic plays out in relationships, because we're not the only ones.
Right. And then fast forward to going in and really working on myself. I now can't. I'm unable to engage in sex without connection first. I like, it's different. Like these whole, like we'll get into what shifted in me. And now I need connection. I need connection. I need to feel safe. And like just this flow between us before I am able to be sexual. So it's a complete like, whoo, I came in and changed the dynamics here. So
that's the idea, is if you're experiencing something like this in your relationship where one of you, I shouldn't have drank bubbly LaCroix because now I got all the burps, but
I've got tea. It's peach, Jesus.
Peach Jesus?
What just happened? Did I glitch? I was like, peach. I totally glitched.
Better reset, Steph. We'll be back. So if you're experiencing this in your relationship, the idea is that there's like one of you needs to feel emotionally connected and bonded and safe, truthfully, right? That's the core of what a lot of this is stemming from, is you need to feel safe before you can even really open up and have sex and feel safe to have sex. And then the other person finds safety in the act of having sex because that equals emotional connection and bonding in their mind. So that's kind of the dynamic that's playing out, or at least the dynamic that we're going to talk about on today's episode.
It's a common dynamic.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's something that we've been through and we're still in and healing through and understanding and picking apart. And I think it definitely is something that other people are experiencing and or have experienced. So
yes, it is.
So we're going to unpack that on today's episode of The Energy is Love. Holy shit, we're talking about sex podcast. Now, we've talked about sex so many times on this podcast.
Oh, we've talked about it in many different ways.
Yeah. It's just been a while.
Yeah.
There's reasons for that, too.
Yeah. Longtime listeners are like, I've heard you say some shit. You're getting nervous now.
Yeah. It's not the first time this topic's come up. So we're trying to do this in a different way, though, because we really like this is a serious issue. This is a serious situation
Sure.
because this dynamic is so, it has the potential to really create a lot of hurt and pain in your relationship. It did in ours, right? Where the one person that needs to feel safe to have sex doesn't feel safe, right? And then the other person is like, why can't you just have sex with me? Because that's how I then get to the point where I feel like I can connect. And it goes to like this big broader topic, I think, that sex is used in so many different ways in order to, I mean, the endless list of the ways that sex has been used over the course of history and time and in society and things like that. But like our association with it and how it's viewed and how it is not just misrepresented, but I think also misunderstood. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this whole concept on the podcast was I've shifted and changed my perspective on not just sex, but sex and connection in our relationship and like the role that it plays and all these kind of different things, right? You and I have had this tumultuous roller coaster experience of how sex would play out in our relationship, where there were plenty of times where it was used in a way that wasn't healthy by any means for either of us.
Yeah.
Some of that, like everybody knows the old adage of like makeup sex is the best sex. And it is in one hand, like, but the fact is like the undertones of that phrase is that's because you are traumatized and you just went through a traumatic experience in a sense, and you're both activated and you're using sex to basically
trauma bond,
as well as like you're dumping all sorts of dopamine and different serotonin and things like that into your system through sex in order to fix the activation part of it. So it never really fixes the core issue when you use sex to solve a fight. All it does is like sweep the fight under the rug that you then lay down and fuck on. And that's terrible, right? Yeah. That doesn't solve anything. And so it perpetuates all sorts of different negative correlations and connections and behaviors and actions. And like, if you're only having sex after you fight, then like you've got a bunch of problems.
Right. There's also like, I just want to like be clear here real fast. There's like, we're touching upon this in a way that is from like couples, individuals who are looking at working on themselves and working on it together, and at least, you know, bringing some accountability into their relationship and the dynamics and wanting to heal and work with it. There is a vast amount of issues that can be included here when we're talking about sex and the toxicity and how sex is like, this is like, we're not bringing violence into this. This isn't a conversation where we're going to have like speak to violent aspects or like that really incredibly abusive aspects. We're going through people that are interested in healing, that are working on it, that are having stuff come up from their past that is affecting where they're at now, or maybe not even seeing this dynamic, but they're willing to hold space with each other and be accountable, because there's just a lot that like we're not touching on, and we don't want that to be confused with somebody that is in an incredibly toxic and violent situation, that these are the tactics. This is how they need to implement or change their way of thinking. Like, be safe. Get to safety, make yourself safe, create a safe environment before this is even something that you can look at. You have to be in a safe environment before you can really dive into this and an healing aspect.
Yeah.
So right off the bat.
Yeah, there's so many different aspects that this conversation, like different avenues and rabbit holes that we could go down with, but we're going to do our best to kind of stay on the topic of, if you're sensing this coming up in your relationship, and if you're starting to want more, then we're going to talk about some things that you can actually do in a minute.
Yes.
Also, just off of what you said too, babe, we have to remind, like, there's, because we talked about this beforehand, where there's a phase like of our relationship in the beginning where sex is so fun, like,
right?
And it's not to say it's not fun now, but like it's this beginning phase where everything is really fun and enjoyable, and you're having all sorts of wonderful experiences, and like that phase of your relationship is really important.
Yeah.
And it's awesome, right?
Yes.
This is the part of your relationship where you've taken off some of those, because truthfully, that beginning phase is all like, it's all mask. You're just showing the best version of yourself, right?
Yeah. And everything, it's not fake. It's just you're feeling your best. So your best is what is always coming out.
Everything is shaved. Everything's trimmed. Everything's nice. You're like super concerned about tan lines.
You are shiny.
Like,
You are shiny.
Like all of those things are taking place during that time period. This is for the couple or for the point in your life where you're at, like,
not everything is shaved.
Like you're not concerned as much about those things, and you're more concerned about like, hey, I want to feel emotionally connected to you. I don't want to just have sex.
Right.
And we also have to articulate there's plenty of times to just have sex.
Yeah. Sometimes
and that's
we want
okay
that.
as well. Right.
Exactly. We're just like, let's just do this.
Exactly. This isn't like every time you have to connect sexually, you have to then create a safe environment where both of you are emotionally connected and everybody's, wants, needs, and desires are held. And yes, you have to do both.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That's the idea.
Yeah. It should always be a safe environment.
Correct.
And so if it's not a safe environment, then yes, it needs to be created first. But if it's like you're in that safe zone and you're just like, you know what, right now I'm feeling pretty good. Let's go have some fun.
Right.
Like, that dynamic is already there. It doesn't have to be okay, now we need to sit down. We need to, you know what feels right for you. Like you're just really tapping in and tuning into where you are and listening and letting your voice matter, letting what you're really feeling inside matter and be what is the driving force, not what am I supposed to do here? What is my role here? What is expected of me here? It's like, first of all, it's what feels good for me, what feels safe for me. And that doesn't mean you just have access to the other person, so don't hear that. But you have to show up with your authentic self and what is really true for you. And that is a hard thing to listen when you've learned how to shut that off. To find that, I mean, we say that in such a simple way, but that can be like years of work to actually be able to hear what your voice is and what your needs are.
Yeah.
Like, what was I? I think before I really connected to, oh, this is what I actually need in sex was 40s. Might have been 41, but there was like,
yeah,
I got in tune with what I liked about sex before then. I got in tune with my desires and being allowed to have desires. And I have desires. My desires aren't bad and shameful. That happened in my later 30s, and then mid 30s. So there was it was a dynamic where sex went from being just torment and roles and something that I wasn't even in my body for, to, I'm going to start to be present and trying to get in your body. Oh my gosh, that's so hard. That's so hard. That's a whole other, but then realizing my desires are valid and wanted, and I got to have those. And then it has been a process to get to the one thing that was the most important that got taken from such a young age, which was, what is my voice? What do I actually want? What do I actually need here? What does sex actually get to look like for me and be? What's my truth in it? And so that was 40s. That's, it takes a while.
It does.
And maybe you're already there and you're like, come on, lady. That's okay. Good for you. I'm glad. I was not. It took me a while to get here.
So a way to kind of not wrap this. Yeah, this episode's over. We've talked about it.
Yeah, we did it.
To give it even more context, if you're feeling like, is this something that I can relate to? Just ask yourself, do I feel any dysregulation? Do I feel triggered? Do I have any sort of response when the topic of sex
does your throat close up
when the topic of sex comes up in your relationship?
Yeah.
And that looks like, hey, we're going to try to have sex right now, or let's plan on having sex this evening, or even if your partner's going to come home and they're going to expect and or want to have sex, what happens inside of your body at that point? Is that a dysregulating experience? Do you suddenly have some sort of panic and anxiety and stress around the topic? life is stressful enough. The idea that coming together with your partner to have sex and to connect emotionally and physically and all these kind of different ways that it can be, that should not be a stressful place. That should be a very safe place where both of you can really show up and be connected and feel and enjoy and pleasure and intimacy and all the kind of different things that it can entail. So if you have that feeling, then this is probably something that you'll want to start exploring and looking at. So let's get into what can you do? Actually, should we talk more about how this manifests in culture and society and how this can kind of show up in people? Because I do think it would.
Some of the ways that,
well,
let's touch on some things.
I think and this is a broad generalization, because the way that this typically shows up in relationships is there's somebody that identifies with the dynamic of needing sex for connection, and then there's somebody else that identifies with needing connection before sex.
And maybe roles shifted, which confuses things even more, like we described.
Yeah. And it's not always masculine, feminine. It's not always the man that needs sex in order to have connection. That is a stereotype for sure. And that's definitely one of those that probably shows up a lot, but it's not only that.
It's not only in heterosexual relationships.
Yeah.
It is just like across the board.
One of the things that I think helps with this conversation is recognizing that the topic of sex, let alone the act of sex, like when it actually comes to the actual act of it, right, is always, it's a space that's convoluted for everybody. And it's like, I dare say that it's not to say sex is a traumatic experience, but I think everybody has trauma around sex. And I think that is something that you can just start to kind of get curious about. And when I say trauma, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've had a traumatic,
assault.
But the idea is the way Western society and the way that here in the US and the way that like sex is dealt with because of religion and all the different reasons, right? It has so much convolution around it that at some point you're going to associate sex and shame. It's just like those two things almost go hand in hand in our culture. And that's really sad because they don't. Like they don't have to go hand in hand. They don't even have to get in bed with each other. You don't have to have shame in conjunction with sex. And that's really at the heart of what all of this is stemming from, where there's so much shame involved in it. So we can talk about all the different ways that kind of can and does show up, but everybody's own individual relationship with it is going to be different. But
different. And it's not just like shame too. It's also being like sexualized as you're growing, as you're developing, which is common. You get like comments get directed at you on how your body is or isn't developing. And for a child hearing that, like it messes with them. It gives expectations. And it's like when you're hearing it from adults and who are talking about you're developing or underdeveloping or overdeveloped, like whatever, your body, it messes with you. It gets in and creates these dynamics, which are like, it's unhealthy. It's a really difficult. So trauma is many different ways, not just the things that we think of first when we hear trauma, especially around sexuality or not. Yeah. As I stutter my way through that, it's hard to say. It's really hard.
If you hold that as kind of the underpinning of everything else, I think it'll start to give you some context. And this truthfully comes from, like, you have to come from the perspective of me and my partner want to heal this. We want to be able to connect deeper. We want to be able to have a safer experience when it comes to sex. So that's the first part, is like acknowledging first and foremost, what are your traumas around it? What is your experience with it? Start to explore and get really curious about, okay, get honest with yourself about what has happened over the course of your life. And that alone could be, like that alone could unpack the next 10 years of your healing journey for some people.
Get some help while you're processing stuff like that. Yes.
And it also can just be like something that you have to think about on a semi-regular basis, and then you're okay. It's different for everybody. But that's truthfully the beginning part of it is, what is your relationship to sex over the course of your life? And where are there traumatic experiences, thoughts, shame, all those kind of things in association with it? And then you have to have that conversation with your partner. So you have to share that information with them.
Which is scary too.
Another level of it that's like super hard and scary.
You have to like find out like how does this react? How do they react to me talking about these experiences? You know, is there safety in speaking to sexual experiences, consensual or not, from my past that is going to affect now our relationship? Like there is so much vulnerability and trust that goes into that. It's a beautiful thing to be able to cultivate and to have, and the healing that can work through it. But it's definitely a muscle sense that you have to develop and train and work with to be able to communicate that. Maybe you've been doing it right off the bat, in which case, high five. I
love all your like, maybe you're a perfect human, but that doesn't exist.
Well, there's like, I know there's different, like there's people out there. It's, what I'm trying to speak to is like some people really struggle in this area, but they knock this one out of the park.
Yeah.
And so maybe they got this one like knocked out of the park, but you know, being able to go to the post office is something that they're like, I cannot do public. I cannot be outside, you know, just different levels of where they're at. So I'm seeing everybody. I'm trying. I'm trying.
So that's the first couple of things you have to do is explore your relationship with sex in the past and find those spots. And then you have to learn, like truthfully, it comes down to being able to communicate. And communication is going to be the biggest, broadest thing that also kind of paints this whole experience, because you have to communicate to each other. You have to be able to communicate. I do not feel safe right now. And then if your partner expresses that to you, like Stephanie, like this has been our experience. We'll kind of share this to the best of our ability, right? Learning that Stephanie didn't feel safe when it came to sex, I internalized as my fault and something that I needed to fix. Like it wasn't that she didn't feel safe. It's that I was doing something that made you not feel safe. Right.
Yeah.
And realizing that because I would have like frustration at first, and then I would have like, over time, I would be like, I'm not doing anything. I would get angry, like all that whole roller coaster of what that experience was like to kind of process from my end, eventually getting to the point of like, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with me. And sometimes it does have stuff to do with me. Sometimes I am closed off. Sometimes I am, like rude. There's all sorts of different behaviors, but by and large, that expression of like, I don't feel safe right now, oftentimes doesn't have anything to do with what I've done.
Yeah.
And all I have to do is acknowledge, oh my goodness, okay, you don't feel safe. What do we need to do right now? What can we do right now? So being able to communicate that, and then just being able to hear it and listen and realize that it doesn't mean that you've done something. It might, but most likely it's more about just the experience that is triggering some things that then we just have to kind of address and sit with and process. So that's a big step.
Yeah, that's huge.
Being able to communicate on both ends, right? Yes. To communicate to your partner, I do not feel safe right now. And I want to. Like, I want to have sex. I want to have that connection with you. I want to go into that experience. But right now, I don't feel safe to.
Yeah, and it not being personal. Like that is, like you're saying, is huge. And then for you on the other side, tell me I can't do connection right now.
Yeah.
Like I'm not able to get in that space. You're not telling me you don't love me. You don't think our connection is important. And like I don't matter. You're just like where you're at in your body, your nervous system, that doesn't feel safe for you. So to be able to hear that and be like, that's cool. Like you get to be where you are without being punished for that. And I get to be where I am for not being punished. And that was, again, it used to be very personal for me. If you couldn't give me the connection or say like, you can have sex with me, but you can't, like, what does that say? And I just overanalyzed and nitpicked and just completely misinterpreted and turned a situation that was just about what was happening inside your body and made it something that was wrong with me and something that was wrong with our relationship. And that wasn't the case, but I didn't understand it differently. I didn't know how to access that part. And like there was such a deep, deep wound there that I couldn't see past my own my own wound and what that felt like.
Yeah.
Because in no way did you say we have to do this. No way did you say this is what's happening or anything. You were just like, I can't do this, but I can show up like this. That's a boundary. That is a perfect way to communicate that. And then now I get to say, I can't do this, but I can show up like this. And we just hear each other and where we're at and love each other where we're at. And it's not personal. Even if we really want the other person to be where we are, it's not personal and it's okay.
Yeah. So again, the foundation of what is going to help in this is the ability to communicate, and you get to practice that. Like the more you can practice communication outside of the construct of sex and your relationship and like laying in bed, how come we're not having sex right now? Like instead of that moment, that's not the time to practice. The time to practice is like, what do you want for dinner?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what are we doing this weekend? Maybe there's a conflict or an issue with one of the kids. Like, all of those times are where you really get to drop in and start practicing communication with each other.
Going on a ride in the vehicle, going on a walk. Things are good.
Like, the more you can practice showing up vulnerably and communicating your feelings, that's going to then play over into this other area that really needs it.
I would also say getting the opt-in from your partner and where they're at, not just like everything's good. Like, I want to talk about our sex life. I'm like, wait, what? You know, maybe the other person's game, but like, hey, I want to open up a conversation. Are you in a space where we can get into some deep stuff, some intimate stuff? And so they are like, am I there? Are my needs met? Can I? Yes, I can have that conversation now. Great.
One of the other things that I think like needs to be like you have to have awareness of is because you said it earlier, babe, and it triggered in my head. Not triggered in a bad way, but it sparked something in my mind where
sparkler.
Like if I say, like if you come to me and you approach me and you want to engage in sex, is that the most professional way? Like the most
if I'm putting the moves on
way,
you,
right? And I say no. I think I'll just speak to myself. Like if I come to you and want to engage in sex and you say no, there's a part of me that feels like you just told me that you don't love me anymore. Right? Like I've been rejected. Like that feels like rejection. Okay. And then it sparks all the little spots throughout the course of my life where I've been rejected. And when we have the correlation between like acceptance and love, and it's tied up with sex, then it's super fucking confusing. Right? Because what you're saying is, I'm not in the mood right now for X, Y, and Z. Tired, stressed, emotionally, I'm feeling things, just not in the mood for sex right now. And what I'm hearing is, you don't love me anymore and I'm rejected. Right? And that is something that really has to be like acknowledged, I think, and really has to be not just looked at, but like if that's how you feel when your partner says no, that's not your partner's fault. That's not even your fault. That is just something that you really have to start to look at and start cultivating the ability to communicate with each other, because you and I both have gone through feeling that way over the course of our relationship. And it like, we practice this all the time now where, hey, do you want to have sex? I don't, right? I'm not in the mood to have sex right now for whatever reason. Okay. And then the work becomes being able to regulate our own nervous system and be like, it's not because she hates me. Right. It's not because I've done anything wrong.
Never your partner's job to do that for you.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just they aren't in the mood for it. And intellectually, you understand that, I'm sure, right? Intellectually, you recognize that your partner saying no in the moment doesn't indicate that there's anything wrong with you. But emotionally, you might feel very differently. Emotionally, it might feel like that rejection, and it might spark all of those other wounds, and you might get defensive. Like if you say no, then I think, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
Right? Or you don't love me anymore, or whatever the cause is, right? So it takes a lot of inner work to be able to go and sit in that space of like, okay, my lovability, my safety, my security, all these, like my role in this relationship, all of this stuff has zero correlation and connection to the actual act of sex. Mm-hmm. And if it does, then there's a lot to unpack.
Right.
What else would you say on that?
Like even like hearing no or not now or not in the mood, whatever, even if like that brings up stuff in you for you to look at, again, how that's never your partner's job to like mitigate for you. Mm-hmm. Like that's a dynamic that definitely can be addressed. But no is like it's, the healing is like when you realize no is a safe answer. No is safe. No is trustworthy. No is like, okay, we're talking about being in a relationship, not just, people meeting, obviously consent is 100%
not
key.
Talking about dating, hooking up, right, and everything like that.
But like when I give you, like that's love. Like that's a love for me. That's a love for you. When we have problems is when the other person says yes when they don't want to, because of all the reasons and all they think. Even if they're like 100, you're giving them the opt-in and they're going for it because they haven't figured out how to say no. They don't know that they're allowed to say no. And again, like really hitting on healthy relationships. We're not talking about violence here. There's just like those parts that they haven't been able to access and really unpack and unwind inside themselves. Or they feel like if I say no, I'm going to upset you. So now I'm going to say yes. So I don't that's not safe. Even just saying those sentences just feels like shit. Like that is, not only is it an incredible violation for the person, but also for the partner that's hearing the yes, because they're not like knowing that like this is causing problems and dynamics. And I'm not like turning them and saying like, oh, the poor thing, I'm just like, for both parties involved, for the relationship, this isn't a healthy thing that helps anybody in the relationship or the relationship itself. Like no gets to be celebrated. And like, even though it's hard sometimes to hear, because you really want that love, you really want that connection, you really want that excitement, that pleasure, wherever you're at. Like when your partner's not where you're at, of course it's a bummer. Of course you want to be on the same page and you want to go like whatever. But that is such an honoring space to know that not only do you get to be that safe and vulnerable with your partner, but they're that safe and vulnerable with you. That no is just something that doesn't ever need an excuse, doesn't ever need a reason, and it doesn't mean that anything is wrong or that you are less or any of that. No is just no. No is just, I don't feel like it. No is just like, it just is. But yeses that aren't 100% yeses are full of so much pain, so much wounds, so much like things that absolutely are going to have to be addressed and healed through. So,
yeah. Like showing up to sex when you don't actually want to, that's not healthy.
Yeah.
Nobody's benefiting from that. That's not I'm sure everybody listening can also relate to times where they had sex where they didn't want to,
right?
Where they weren't in the mood for it, where they felt obligated to because of whatever, X, Y, or Z response or answer that, we have, that we tell ourselves that I have to. Otherwise, I'm going to upset them. Right. Otherwise, they're not going to think that I love them. Otherwise, there's just so many endless reasons why.
And these are generally the stories in your head. Like, if I don't do this, this is going to happen. If your partner's telling you, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. Those are the, like...
Yeah, that's a different relationship.
That's the dynamics we've caveated that this is not that conversation. Yeah. So these things are in your head, whether it's like whatever you've learned from childhood or past relationships or however it's came up, or even in this relationship that maybe it was that way at one point and you both are healing through things. So it's so big. It's so big. But yeses, when you practice this, yeses become even more sexy. Because like not only do you have this, like there's never a doubt, do you really not want to? You're not in that convoluted space. Is this a yes? I mean, and sometimes that still happens. You still have to, like double check and opt in. That's always a great thing. But you're not second guessing everything. It's like when we show up to the party, we're like, we show up. We know that our yeses are, I like that.
Right.
I like to know that.
We've both opted into this experience.
Yes. And also realizing that what is true today isn't, or what is like my yeses and my nos and how I'm feeling today does not mean that that's what it's going to be like tomorrow or even 3 hours from now, that it changes. Our moods change, our demeanors change.
There's so many times we want to have sex in the morning, and then by the time we actually have time to have sex, I'm not really
like, yeah, I love you.
Well, you said it. Well, shit's changed. I'm not really. I ate a big lunch, and I'm not in the mood for it.
Dude, I just killed that bean dip. We're not going for this. But also another thing to bring awareness to is emotions and moods and feelings are not boundaries. So while those are fluid and they change, when you're like, well, this is my boundary today. This is when you're constantly moving that boundary. That's not, that's a really unhealthy way to do it. And it doesn't mean that you are intentionally being unhealthy. Just maybe you don't know how to hold that boundary. So that's something for you to look at. And if you do know how to hold that boundary, but you're moving it as a manipulation tactic on the partner, then again, that's something really strong to look at. So you get to shift and change and be fluid, but boundaries are boundaries. And then when they change in a relationship, conversation is really key for those. So the partner needs to be aware of the boundary that's changing, and they get their buy-in too. Not that you change your boundary, but they get to reevaluate what their role is with this.
Yeah.
They're so big. There's so much.
There's so much.
much.
We could do a 10-part series on this.
We're probably going to.
Yeah. And we're
Not
in the
today.
process, we've talked at the beginning of this episode, if you listen to the intro, we are designing some workshops where we're going to be going into some things that are designed to help in all of these really difficult things. This is just a conversation, throwing out some things to spark some ideas in your mind. You might be feeling this way. You might be experiencing this or getting curious, and now you've got some context for what it might actually be or what it might look like.
Some words to what was going on inside that you didn't know how to articulate.
Yeah,
You're like, oh.
Again, if you're feeling this way or that you can relate to this, you have to go back and look at your relationship with sex. And this is before your partner. This isn't, it's twofold. It's prior to your relationship and then also in your relationship. And you have to see where you have moments of trauma, pain, shame, all those different things in conjunction with sex, because you have to be able to correlate that with now being triggered in your current relationship. And then you have to learn how to communicate those things with your partner. So you have to come to if you don't have some level of trust and communication with your partner already, don't start with this conversation. You have to start with much easier conversations and in a much different way. This is for those people that already have some trust with each other. You have some practice being vulnerable. You're both in the space of wanting to work on things together. So that's this relationship. Now, after you've gotten to the process of being able to identify, and then you practice communicating about it, I want to speak to the other big thing that I think needs to be, because it's always who's right and who's wrong. So again, just in our relationship dynamics, where Stephanie needs emotional connection in order to feel safe enough to have sex. And oftentimes I would want to have sex in order to get to the point of wanting or being able to have the emotional connection. This is the big caveat that nobody's right, nobody's wrong. Everybody can be right in their own experiences. And this might be different for you and your partner in your relationship. But truthfully, ask yourself, do you want your partner to have sex when they don't feel safe? For whatever reason. If you are comfortable with your partner having sex when they don't feel safe, then you have a lot more to kind of look at. This is for me that I personally had to look at it from that lens of your safety, Stephanie. That was far more important than me, whether I ever needed sex or wanted sex or whatever. And the fact that I felt the fact that I was using sex as a way to feel safe stems from trauma that needed to be healed. And it's far more important to me to support you in the process of cultivating feeling safe before we have sex. So I think that is the one that needs to be prioritized over, like, if we're looking at it from a like who's right or who's wrong or whose needs are more important. Like, you don't want your partner to not feel safe ever. And so prioritize that. Swallow whatever pride it is that you need, or whatever you might be feeling. Like, it's not negating your experience or what you're going through and how you feel like this is what you need. It is simply acknowledging that you would never want your partner to feel that way, especially within this, like, within the, within your relationship, within that space of your relationship. So that's the big caveat. Like, that's the big thing too, is like, prioritize that. Let that be the thing that kind of is, quote unquote, the right thing, or the thing that gets chosen over the other thing, because you never want your partner to feel that way.
Yeah.
So what else, babe? Because we can wrap up and move on. And like we said, this is just the introductory.
Yeah, this is just the intro. And I'm sure that, because this is such a charged conversation, and we touched on things that, it's really a charged conversation. So sure that there's some, if you got triggered hearing this, and a lot of times that when we have these wounds here, we don't hear all of the conversation too. We hear this one point that we're like super hyper focused on. So if something, Gaia, you want to talk about it, like, reach out. We're willing to have the conversation. We have boundaries around that, of course. But if you're like, what did you mean about this? Or what you're like, we're creating a space where, in fact, we're creating a whole community where you can like talk about these things and really like dive in and just realize that like there's the likelihood of people listening to this with extensive trauma is huge. So if this
it's like what I said earlier, everybody's got trauma around
everybody's
sex.
got trauma. And like how we did the caveat, trauma isn't always like a violent act, but it is so often. And so if this is hitting you right now and you're like, whew, and it's activating you, like, you get to feel everything you're feeling. Like, what is coming up, like, yes, you get to experience what you're feeling. And like, I hope that you can find some stillness in yourself, but also remember there's like, there's only so much we can actually cover in a podcast.
Yeah.
And like,
there's
so much. We could sit here. This is something that would be like a live stream that is like a 24/7 Truman Show, to be able to hit everything and to cover every topic, to cover every angle, every situation, every different, like, so it's not that we're not seeing you and that yours isn't being addressed or bypassed or any things that it may feel like. It's just that there's no way that we could really get to it all in this podcast. But, like, reach out, get some support that you may need in this, and just like, you're worthy of all the support and all the healing. So whatever is coming up, we're just going to send like love and hugs and, air hugs, not physical touch. It's okay. But like, if you want to reach out to the community too and talk, and if you want a little extra support in what's going through, like, we're opening a space, and we hope that everybody has somebody to talk to and somebody safe in their space and in their life that they can go to, and even just say, I'm not feeling safe right now. Can you just be in my space with me? I don't want to necessarily talk about it. I don't want to express or share anything. I just want to have somebody to breathe next to me. And we all deserve that. And I hope that you have that and can reach out for that if you need that in this moment.
Cool. Should we move on to the segment of the podcast where we answer questions?
Let's do it.
Okay. So every week we answer somebody's question on the podcast, and we can answer your question.
We can.
We just need to know what it is.
Yeah.
So email those to info@energyislove.love, or you can hit us up on any social media and just let us know, and we will answer your question on the podcast. Maybe. Most likely. There's a good chance.
Well, and then also, like, that thing, unless you tell us specifically that we are allowed to use your name, you articulate that verbally or like written, we don't say your name, so you're safe.
You can ask us anything. So this week's question actually was in part kind of what sparked this episode, as well as this conversation for us, and all sorts of different things. So let's have it, babe. What is it?
Let's have it. We are currently working on healing our relationship, but keep getting stuck when it comes to intimacy and sex. What can we do to deal with the past traumas and negative experiences that are impacting our sexual relationship?
Okay. That's a really, really good question.
I think you did the first step already.
Right.
Which is
acknowledged it and recognize that there's an issue that you want to fix.
Right there. Like,
right. That is a huge first step.
That's huge. You did it. What can you do? You're doing it. You're like, that is huge.
It is huge. Without acknowledgement, right, we can't address anything. And so that's the first step, whether it's this in the construct of this question or any other thing that you're facing and dealing with. You have to be able to kind of put a name to it and put a framework around it in order to start addressing it. So yeah, acknowledgement is huge.
And validating it. Validating your feelings, your partner's feelings, even if it's something that you don't understand or it doesn't make sense to you, that does not make it any less real for them in their space. So like if you were never validated, giving yourself that, like validate, this is how I'm feeling. It doesn't have to like, for whatever, it doesn't matter. No excuses. I'm not going to like fill that with, this is what you were feeling. Validate your feelings, your partner's feelings without judgment. So you're just, or blaming or shaming or you should have's or why don't you's, all of those well-intended but harmful phrases. Just listen to them. Just listen while they're expressing and validating.
What else?
What about exploring different techniques and strategies? So we had to write some stuff down because this is a good question. So exploring different techniques and strategies that can help you feel more comfortable and connected during sexual activity and non-sexual activity. So when you're not in the space, when you're not where you're trying to cultivate and you're working on being intimate sexually with each other, practicing things like non-sexual touch and not having it always like leaning with the air of it, just being able to touch without it having to lead to something. So non-sexual touch is huge. And then when you are, do you have anything?
Well, I think that like when it comes
I got totally nervous. Like
sex feels like, it's not necessarily feels like a performance, but it feels like it's an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear sometimes. And basically there's a lot of emotion that brings up anytime you're going to have sex because it feels like an experience, and it is an experience, right? What you have to do, like practicing connection and intimacy and communication and all of those things that really enhance the experience as well as make you feel safe and bonded and intimate. All of those things that lead up to being able to do that in quote unquote the experience and the performance and the act of sex, you have to practice those outside of that space. Like that's the biggest important part there is like practice communication outside of sex. Practice, like you said, non-physical, not necessarily non-physical, but non-sexual touch. So get really comfortable with touching each other in a way outside of sex that is really just about the feeling and the act of, and there's no sexual energy connected to it. It's just that type of touch goes a long way to building safety and trust so that when you're actually in the act of the experience, you can feel safer and more connected. So the time to practice these things, it's almost like you're preparing yourself throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout your life with the knowledge that this is us doing the work so that when we finally get to the act and to the experience of connecting sexually, we're going to have all of this practice.
Right. I want to riff on that just a little bit more too. Especially when like we're in a society, there's so much going on. There's so much overstimulation happening that like touch can be too much. And so when it's always like maybe even you're just sitting next to the person, like getting their buy-in. Is it okay? Would it feel okay if I sat next to you? Just one of those things if they're in an activated state, but that's not the time you're practicing it. But when touch is always coming in with an expectation, just like even asking yourself, how often do I touch my partner when I'm not like gearing towards something that I want from them, that I want some in an exchange, and just like bringing that and really sitting. That was a big deal. That was a big deal. So I'm getting like twisted up over my words here, but realizing like the percentage of how many times we can just touch without asking for something, without it meaning something,
which there's not an undertone of sex to it,
which creates so much pressure. like even in like the healthy relationships and where you've got this communication going, if you're only touching when it's time for sex or when you're like trying to induce it, and that is just going to start to feel like pressure. It's going to start to feel like even a hug that may be supportive, you're not going to really find yourself wanting, because it's going to feel like pressure that's always leading to one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's important for sure.
What about ways that when you are wanting, you're both on the same page and you're like, yes, I want to be intimate right now, but I'm kind of feeling uncomfortable and don't really know where to start. And because sometimes when you have these things, when you're practicing new ways to being intimate with each other, it's like you're starting out from the beginning. What do we do?
Right.
What do we do? How do we do this? What are we supposed to do here? Because
be okay with the being silly, goofy, and laugh. Like you're going to be like, it's going to be, the more you can laugh and the more you can not take yourself seriously in those moments, the more everything just becomes so much easier.
Yeah.
Where there isn't the pressure anymore, because you're going to make a mistake. Like, I think I headbutted you last night when I went in for a kiss. Like, all of those things are going to happen, and you just get to laugh and be silly about it. And that's totally okay.
Yeah.
What else?
Do you want to?
Oh, no, that's okay.
No, that's okay.
No.
Stay tuned for another time. We're not going to touch on that one right now. So practicing consent. So we spoke to that a lot. So just really like practicing consent and prioritizing each other's physical and emotional boundaries. That is something that is valid in every relationship, every dynamic. It doesn't matter if you've been together like 3 minutes, 3 years, 30 years. Consent and boundaries are always like, they need to be what matters when you're going through that. So just really practicing, and you can practice in little fun ways. It doesn't have to be mechanical. Like you can make consent sexy. You can also like not have that tone. It's just finding where your partner is and really honoring that space and honoring yours. It's like, I really want to emphasize that too. So while we're going through this, and it is a loving gesture with our partner, and their feelings and experience is valid, and you have to be aware of it. But that does not mean that you disregard your own, like your consent. Practice your consent, practice your physical boundaries and your emotional boundaries. Those are your first priority, is your consent. And then the second is like you're going with your partners.
Yeah. Like the bodily autonomy is huge.
Huge.
Recognizing that just because you're in a committed relationship, maybe you've been together for 10 years, maybe maybe things have been this way up until this point and you want to change it, that's okay. But like the idea that you just have free range to touch your partner's body at any given point in any given way that you want to, that needs to change. Like really step into the place of recognizing that their body is their own body and they might not want to be touched in that way, from the simplest thing of a handhold to a boob grab or a smack on the ass, whatever it is. Really look at their body as something that you don't just have a right to, because you're in a committed relationship with each other. And sometimes that often goes missed, especially when you've been together for a while and you start to get comfortable with each other. And there's a part of it that is also like, there's an aspect of that type of connection that is, I dare say it's healthy on one level, but it also needs to be acknowledged that it's not expected. And a much more healthier way of doing it would be recognizing that your partner may not feel comfortable in the moment. So you want to make sure and communicate, what are you feeling? Not necessarily what are you feeling, but like, does this feel okay? Is this type of touch okay? Are you okay with this type of connection right now? And that allows you to, again, practice those conversations outside of those moments. So then that way you're better able to answer and respond and communicate.
And the way that you check into is so important. Because if you're like, when you're checking in, does this feel okay? Do you like this right now? Is this, is it okay if I do this? Your intent is huge when you're going through the motions, or even like, is it okay if I do this? Does this offend you now? Or the way that you present it, like that's a huge dynamic. And the energy that you give is very, very, very important. You can change, you can still be asking for consent and by setting up a response that they are in pressure to give. So just like really checking yourself on that. And how are you asking for consent? How are you respecting their boundaries? How are you showing up in that space?
For sure.
For sure.
Anything else?
Identify. Here we go. Triggers. Speaking of that, identify any triggers or negative patterns that may be present in your sexual relationship.
Yeah. That's huge.
Right. Right.
And that involves like both the communication aspect of it, but like really not analyzing, but looking inside and seeing what does trigger me. And it's oftentimes a somatic experience. It's being able to recognize your nervous system. What does bring up this feeling inside of you? Because if you're feeling triggered and activated and closed off about anything, the last thing you want to be doing is engaging in sex. And that's not going to help you feel safe. That's not going to help build trust and intimacy in your relationship. So you have to get very curious about what is sparking you and triggering you. And it doesn't necessarily just mean with your partner. Like it means in the outside world. What is creating dysregulation in my nervous system, so that I can start to bring awareness to those things and address those things and communicate those things. And again, that's going to help immensely when it comes to the experience and to the act of connecting with your partner.
Right. You really want to work together to avoid bringing those triggers into that sexual space. And it can also be just like little things, like and I don't mean to say little things, but things that maybe go unnoticed or missed because they don't seem subtle. That's the word. Subtle things, like a certain smell, like maybe, I don't know, like maybe marinara sauce is attached to like seriously like smells. So like maybe there's a traumatic event and the other person, or maybe the food that you were eating was spaghetti. So when you smell that, it's a triggering aspect. So maybe going to, the Olive Garden isn't quite the romantic gesture, or maybe when you just got done eating, that's for you to, come over and kiss them with spaghetti sauce or something. Like I'm just using this. It can be, alcohol. The smell of beer is a huge one. Cigarette smoke. If you've been hanging around with your friend and they smoke and then you come home smelling like that, and that's a trigger for your partner, they're not going to want to be sexual with you at that moment. So that's not the time to try and engage them when you're aware of triggers of smells, or maybe there's sounds, if they have fear when it's thundering and lightning outside and there's this lightning storm that's happening, and you think it's beautiful and it's putting you in the mood. They're over there in a corner with their weighted blanket, like, it's not the time. Just be aware of those things. So some of them you bring to the table, and some of them, like you said, Craig, were just like the surrounding the environment. But when you have awareness of them, then that's a really compassionate way to keep that out of a situation, to keep that out of your, sexy time when you want to be sexy and intimate and connected with your partner, and they're not trying to maintain their nervous system and try and figure out how to be intimate with you at the same time, because that's just, that doesn't feel good for anybody.
Right. And again, the fact that you're even aware of it and asking the question, you're on the right track.
Yes.
So kudos to you.
Yeah.
And speaking of triggers, right? Next month in Energy is Love Together, the new online community that we created this month, actually in the month of May, because that's when this podcast comes out.
Yes.
We're going into triggers. So we're going to be looking at them, exploring them, how to recognize them, what happens to your body when you're triggered, how to regulate your nervous system, all those different things is the big topic that we're going to be going over this month in both the workshops for the community. So if you want to be a part of that conversation and you want to come participate, go to our website, energyislove.love, and you can just click on the banner up top, or you can go to offerings and you'll find a link to go to Energy is Love Together and learn all about it, and then sign up. And we would love to come see you. The online community is often away from social media, so you don't have to stress about anything.
That's a new shift we've made if you've listened to past podcasts.
Yeah, you get to have this new space that we've created that is just for the people in the community, and it's much nicer. It's much, like, you don't have to go to Facebook anymore for it. You don't have to deal with your Facebook feed. It's a whole bunch of headaches relieved that you now get to go experience this offline away from social media. So come join us. We're excited about it. And as always, if this resonated with you and you enjoyed the podcast, please, we would be greatly appreciate if you would leave it a review wherever you're listening, and subscribe and rate and all those different things. and then just tell somebody about the podcast. And we're definitely going to be talking about sex some other episode down the road. So stay tuned, everybody. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.